didn't come home. Hello and welcome to the Stiles Council, the England podcast that has had an awful lot to think about over the last few days. My name is David Hartrick. Joining me to my virtual left is Chris Nee. Chris, how are you?
Hello, yeah, I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Yes, yeah, in very good spirits. But to just have a word about the World Cup overall, I don't know about you, but I am seriously jonesing.
Yeah, it's been a funny few days with no football to watch, or no meaningful football to watch.
No, it was such a good World Cup, wasn't it? Before we even get on to England or anything like that, you know, one goalless draw, some proper stone-cold classic games in and amongst. And I think I was looking back over the wall chart. I reckon I watched all but about 2 games, which is disgusting when you think about it.
Yeah,
but
same.
And I saw the highlights of both of those. And I reckon in that entire time there was probably about 4 outright stinkers, which for somebody who watched the entirety of the 2010 World Cup, we'd take that, wouldn't we, Chris?
Yeah, and I did that, so I'm very happy. It was just able to keep this base level of entertainment throughout, I thought. We've had World Cups that have had higher peaks, but for guaranteed you will get at least this level of fun, you can't beat it. It was brilliant.
No. I mean, the thing is, being an England fan is like your football supporting life is made up of moments, isn't it, Chris, rather than like anything sustained.
Yeah.
And this whole World Cup felt like a moment, but with one really, really high point from an England fan's point of view, and that was, of course, Germany going out. No, I'm joking. So, since the last time we spoke to you, England have been in the semi-final. Spoilers, we lost. And we've played in a bit of a nothing game, really. The third place playoff, Belgium were much more up for it, weren't they, Chris, than us, really?
More up for it and better, I think, to give them their credit. I think
yeah.
It showed, both games over the weekend, in fact, I think showed how far short we would have been in the final.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't think it's particularly negative to say that.
No, and I don't think even though England did something amazing over the course of this World Cup, which is get to that semi-final, in a funny sort of way, we haven't learned anything about England that we didn't already know, have we? We knew where our strengths were, and we knew where our weaknesses are, and we knew our weaknesses were weak as well. They weren't, minor deficiencies. We knew that midfield was a huge option. We knew as soon as Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain went off injured back end of last season, it became an even bigger problem. And, to talk in broad terms about the semi-final and the third place playoff, that was really where it showed, wasn't it, Chris?
Yeah. What surprised me about England was that they lived up to the limits of all of what you just spoke about. It was a team that we felt that we knew the character of, but weren't quite sure that we had it exactly on the money. It was a World Cup whose opening of the draw we didn't know was going to happen to quite the extent that it did. And the opportunities that came up, I think England took them to the best of their abilities, which a lot of people are overlooking as the minimum they should have achieved. But, from near enough 30 years now supporting England, seeing them get to a semi-final because the draw opened up that far and no further is absolutely fine by me.
Mm. And it doesn't matter whether you're a good nation or a bad nation. I can go back over... I could probably, off the top of my head, I could probably give you 4 or 5 World Cups with barely thinking about it, that there has been a team in the semi-finals that, in inverted commas, the draw has opened up for. But you have to take the opportunity as it's presented to you. So, and I hear a lot of, well, we were only in the semi-final because of the way the draw opened up. Well, there is part of that, but there is also an England team in very, very recent history that lost to Iceland.
Yeah. Well, this is exactly it, Dave. You know, I have little truck with the idea that the opening of the draw takes anything away from England's achievement, purely on the basis that we have seen an England team repeatedly fail to achieve anything in those circumstances. Not necessarily with a draw that went quite as wide as this one, but we've had Iceland. You know, we've seen a team fail to beat Algeria. We've gone into a second round game and got absolutely hammered. And it has been too long since we won a knockout game. Certainly too long since we won a penalty shootout. Never in the case of the World Cup specifically. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that, yeah, we might have really struggled to get through against Uruguay or Portugal. You know, teams that made very little headway on the other side of the draw are better than England at the moment. That's tournament football.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what we need to watch out for as England supporters is that we don't get carried away with a semi-final that feels great, but doesn't necessarily mean that we're the fourth best team in the world, because we ain't.
No, but I don't think anybody sensible is. But in terms of progress, for me, this World Cup, England have won a group game in the last minute after a really sort of controlled performance where they stuck to their guns. They've battered the minnow in the group. They've won a penalty shootout. They've dealt with a knockout game in absolutely stellar fashion. They've got down and dirty with Colombia when Colombia have dragged them down to that level and competed. And that's 5 things that all represent progress to me, because they're 5 things that England just don't do, and they certainly don't do them all in a row, Chris.
No, it was a very good tournament for England. There's no two ways about it, in my opinion. And ticking all those boxes along the way, as well as taking a very, very good Croatia side to extra time, of course.
Yeah. Well, I think we did better than the first half. But what I would say is that all that happened at half-time, I've seen some quite knee-jerk reactions about, you know, oh, we came out and same old England and what have you. It wasn't the same old England when we came out second half. What happened to my mind, Chris, and, you know, you may disagree with me here, but just our age, inexperience, and that weakness in midfield just came to the fore. I don't think we were sort of embarrassed or suddenly ridiculously outplayed or, you know, we got hammered. It was a little bit of experience, some of the younger players starting to sit deep because they didn't quite know what to do. And I'd also say a bit of inexperience of the situation on Southgate's part as well.
The England squad and its manager are not the finished article yet. And I say Southgate is very much a part of that. The second half against Croatia, I thought, was less an example of the old England coming back, which, as it happens, I don't think happened at any point in this competition. And more, as you say, a lack of experience on England's part and an improved Croatia performance in the second half. They came out a different side. And they worked out very quickly, as you do as an experienced team, that if you can force England to go a little bit longer and you can outplay their midfield when you've got one of the best ones in the tournament and England don't, you're going to start to dominate the ball. And what I think actually really told was the fact that they were able to release Perisic.
Yeah.
Because their central midfielders have rightly been praised for their second half and extra time performance against England in the semi-final. But I think the biggest effect of Modric and Rakitic playing well, and Brozovic, was that they were able to release Perisic and Vesalco to a lesser extent to perform much better than they had in the first half. And when you release Perisic, you have got a serious problem for the opposition to handle.
As was shown in the final.
Yeah.
You know, I think France were the best team there and the best squad there, and they struggled with Perisic in that first half, and to an extent in the second half. Though, obviously, you know, when you get a couple of goals ahead, when you get your nose ahead, it's a different game. The sort of the semi-final and the final, the semi-final and third place playoff matches have been sort of done to death and talked over and looked through, Chris. So I'm going to drop something on you now, and I know how you love improvisation.
Yep.
Instead of going over the games, which I think there are so many places you can do that, and I think it's worth saying that we've both commented how good the standard of coverage around this World Cup is.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the best things about the internet, Chris, is it's forever. Because I know there's things I've read and pieces I've bookmarked that I will go back to in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, just because I'm prone to a touch of nostalgia like that anyway. But there's just been some phenomenal writing, hasn't there?
Certainly has. I think I tend to stay in my lane media-wise for various political reasons, and the fact that I consider myself too old to be taking on new ideas. So I've dedicated most of my time to the daily check on Football 365, where I think it pains both of us to say, but Dan Story has been leading the charge with some extraordinary stuff. And The Independent and The Guardian have both provided great written coverage as well, particularly England match reports have kind of really floated my boat. And Podcast Land, we both appeared on 200%'s daily podcast, which sounded like they were really struggling with at the end, motivation-wise. But was just brilliant every day. And the BBC did a daily podcast, which I'm still kind of working my way back through at the moment, which has been really good in significant portions as well.
Yeah, I've found the sort of the three biggest in the sector totally, Football Weekly and the Football Ramble. I've not, it's not that I avoid them or anything like that, but I've listened to a couple of Football Weeklies and I've listened to a few Totally Footballs, but I'm not listening to any Rambles. And the reason is because, like the Times had Natalie Sawyer as host, and she was absolutely brilliant. And they flipped it. Marcotti's usually the host. He was on as a pundit several times, and you got Henry Winter, who has his faults, but when he's talking about England, there's nobody sort of more in the know, and various others. So the Times was sensational, and like you say, there were things like 200% that were just absolutely brilliant, and so of a moment that, like you, I'm sort of going back and picking through some of the others now, like the BBC, picking and choosing, going and sort of grazing on them, because during the tournament I just had like a sort of staple couple that I just had to listen to every day, so everything else went to one side. What I wanted to move on to, Chris, is we're going to have a look at the squad itself, and we're going to go through player by player, and we're going to basically just give each player a grade. We're just going to go ABC. Nobody's a D or lower, but there's a few U's who will class as ungradable because they haven't played or whatever. But I just want to talk a little bit about certain individuals' progress, and a little bit about the future as well, Chris, because I think it's worth looking ahead now. So we'll start with the goalkeepers. Obviously, a U for Butland and Pope.
Yep.
Obviously, from everything we see and read, they were great members of the squad. But England had a lot of star men in this tournament, but I honestly think Pickford was the star man in the end. Well, what's your take on it, Chris?
After the quarter-final, I think I would have gone with Kieran Trippier to just edge that. But I think the performances in the last couple of games brought Pickford ahead of him. And so he's my man of the tournament for England as well.
I think the thing about Pickford is I keep coming back to the same thing, Chris. It's the penalty shootout.
Yeah.
Because that is such a massive moment for any goalkeeper, but for an England keeper, it is a suffocating, stifling, horrible, awful situation to be in, because you can't escape the weight of history, can you? You just can't. And for him to take that in the fashion that he did, and the save he produced, and bear in mind he got close to sort of the couple of penalties he could get close to, because the other couple were absolutely superb. He had absolutely no chance with. But I was just so staggeringly impressed, and we keep coming back to that same thing we talked about before the tournament, Chris. His distribution's immense, isn't it?
it was really obvious that the edge that he has over Butland is so integral to the entire setup of this England team that it really wasn't a contest that we thought it was going to be, was it?
No. That ability to be able to pick somebody out on the wing from sort of that, taking that ball, like that sort of half volley or the volley, just absolutely brilliant. Now back that up with some sensational keeping. I mean, I could pick out 3 or 4 stops, but time we have to crack on. But there's no way it's not an A, is there? And realistically, it's an A star for me, Chris.
Yep, easy A star.
Yeah, okay.
I think he was the best goalkeeper in the competition.
Yeah, I do as well. He never put a foot wrong for me, Chris. And I'm not having the Januzaj goal as a goalkeeping error, because I've watched that goal a few times, and people were in such a rush to say that Pickford was too small or he went for it with the wrong hand. They actually forgot. It's an unbelievable finish, Chris.
Yeah. Courtois conceded goals as well.
Yeah. Well, anyway, moving into the defenders. I'm not going to take them in sort of... I think we'll look at the fullbacks briefly. So, Trippier, outstanding, wasn't he?
Couldn't ask for more from him. Even got himself a goal.
Yeah. I think you've just absolutely summed it up, Chris. I think you couldn't ask for any more from him. I don't think he had any more to give. And I mean, when he went off in the semi-final, he looked absolutely broken as well, didn't he?
I was really surprised when he played on Saturday.
Yeah, I was too. But that's what cramp does. It's awful. Easy A star again, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. He was exceptional.
Phil Jones, brief appearance in the game that didn't matter. I just every time I see him, that's the noise I make. He is the Twitter generation's Phil Neville, isn't he, Chris?
I think we have possibly seen the last substantial contribution to England from Phil Jones.
I hope you are right. The thing about Phil Jones is that I'm sure there is a really, really good defender in there. But whether he has been coached so far away from that, or whether it's just a mental issue, he just can't put 90 minutes together. I don't know what it is, but there is a barrier there, isn't there, Chris? And it's just not happening. It has to be a C because no one's getting lower than a C. But I think you might be right. Gary Cahill has to be an ungradable, really.
Yeah.
But Walker, Stones, Maguire. Let's talk those 3. Walker, I go back to that first game and conceding that penalty, where if you're an established central defender, I still maintain you don't concede that penalty. Stones, I thought, was really good. Switched off for the second goal in the semi-final, but he's a central defender. He's played so much football. I think it's worth saying how good that Croatia front line was at switching positions and giving them something difficult to think about. How much blame do you put on him, Chris?
Well, I mean, he takes the responsibility for it, but I was tired watching that game.
Yeah.
So I'm absolutely not willing to criticise him for it or to write him off or, frankly, even to drop him a grade because of it. It was one of those things. Very good opposition, very, very late in the game, momentary lapse, which is not something that we don't expect from him at this stage in his career. And otherwise, probably one of the top-end defenders in the tournament. So, I'm giving him an A, and I feel very comfortable with that. I think he was, apart from that lapse, really very good.
I think you summed it up there, Chris, really, in that I think it was his responsibility, but I think there's a big difference between responsibility and blame. And I really can't bring myself to, like you, downgrade his performance. I thought he was excellent, Stones, to be fair. And that is an A. Walker, for me, is a strong C+. stroke low B. Not that he did anything particularly wrong, but there are just moments in games for me, and it's not really his fault either, Chris, but there are these moments in these games where you realise it's a good job he is absolutely lightning quick, because it gets him out of trouble on more than one occasion. But he's not a central defender, is he?
No. Luckily, he is lightning quick, though.
Yeah, that's the thing. So he hasn't got the natural skill set, but what he has is an unbelievable recovery pace. So it's sort of a C plus for me. But again, you know, I don't want that to be seen as sort of a criticism, if you know what I mean. I don't think that's all his fault. Where are you?
I'm B minus. I think the only difference between you and I here is that I am giving him that little extra mark because of his recovery pace, which I thought was absolutely essential in at least a couple of these games.
Yeah. Now let's talk about Slabhead. I thought last season, I said on this podcast before the World Cup, I said I am a big fan of Maguire, but I've never seen him put a run of games together like he did at this World Cup. He's extremely... I mean, watching him at this World Cup, you would assume he's pretty much the finished article, and he's nowhere near, Chris. I can tell you that now. He's still very raw. Still got a long way to come. I watched him have a slight nightmare performance in the flesh at Huddersfield Town last season. But this World Cup, he's just, like, the maturity he's shown is just outstanding, isn't it?
Maturity, ability on the ball, defensive ability, and just the most wonderful attitude to playing for England. I can't fault him. You know, I think he shades John Stones across the tournament for me. Got himself a goal, which I think we all felt deep in the heart, and showed himself to be a very able, very modern, very this England central defender. Yeah,
and I think I think we're in danger of sort of assuming. I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be quite surprised when he makes a couple of errors early on next season. But I don't think they should be. He is a wonderful central defender who is still massively learning his trade. He's 25 years old now, and in central defender terms, in top class football, that is no age at all. You know, I would argue you don't hit your peak in that position till you're, I'd say, between 28 and 32. Really, that's your sort of central defending peak, because it's so much about, you know, your intellect and your intelligence, isn't it, Chris?
That's exactly what it is, and all of that comes with games played, and big occasions experienced.
So I think Harry Maguire is a very easy A again, isn't he?
100%.
Yeah. Danny Rose, it's a C for me. He wasn't fit, was he?
Wasn't fit, wasn't ready. He looked a prime candidate to come in when his competition looked a little bit short and looked a little bit like the balance of the side would benefit from a left footer. But I don't think that Rose was in any position to step up and apply that balance to the side and to contribute going forward and contribute defensively to the level that we would have expected, really.
The thing is,
it's not his fault.
No, we know how good Danny Rose is, don't we? He just wasn't fit for this tournament. I know exactly why he was taken and why Southgate would trust him, and that's because he's an absolutely exceptional fullback, isn't he? So if you've got the chance to take him, but he just wasn't fit. Trent Alexander-Arnold obviously has to be an ungradable. Ashley Young, for me, Ashley Young is overall play. There were several games where he looked every one of his 32 years come the sort of 75th minute. But his delivery from corners, I thought, was outstanding. I thought it was a massive part of our plan. You know, he was a real offensive weapon in the end. What would you give him, Chris?
I'll give it a B for those reasons. I think his play overall in the first hour of games was fine. I get a little frustrated with him because in his years at Villa, I watched a player who I preferred to play on the left to on the right because he had the ability to go both ways and hit the byline and cross with his left foot or cut inside and shoot with his right. And his primary weapon in those days was that the defender would not know which of those two he was going to do. He's lost one of those.
Yeah.
So it became a bit of a drain on the aspect of surprise, really. He was always cutting in. We nearly got a couple of goals from his open play crosses. And I think the experience that he did bring to the squad and the big game experience that he brought to the squad just about outweighed that little lack of balance. And it's only the fact that he did sort of visibly tire at the back end of games that drops him down from being one of our better performers. In short, he's getting a bit of stick. I think he was absolutely fine.
I think he was absolutely fine as well. I think his delivery from corners is an A, but I think you're exactly right. His overall game was a B and a slightly low B at that. But
yeah.
You know, he's 32 years of age and he's had a very long season in a new position. That's the other thing we shouldn't sort of downplay here. He's basically been retooled as a fullback by Mourinho out of necessity, and yeah, he's 32 and he's just done a sort of like nearly 50 game season. So I'm not surprised he was blowing a bit at the end. So yeah, so I think B is fair there. Midfielders. Dyer is a funny one, isn't he, Chris?
To an extent. I personally think he's a comfortable C.
Yeah.
I was a little disappointed in his overall performances, really. I think he's a little bit the victim of the tactical decisions that put him in those positions.
Exactly what I was going to say.
So yeah. I think to an extent you let him off the hook a little bit for not looking brilliant in all the games. But on the opportunities he's had to sit in there instead of Henderson for parts of games, I think he's looked a little bit short, to be honest. And I don't know whether that's about needing a run of games to stay in the groove or stay consistent. But I think the highlight was the winning penalty against Colombia, and that's to his credit, because that's quite a moment in England's history, really, as well as his own career.
Yeah.
But I think I wasn't expecting to see such a drop in our ball retention with that simple swap of midfielders.
You're right. He's not. You know, it's never like D and E or an F or anything like that.
No.
He is a C because you're exactly right. It's the situations he was forced to come on into, and I don't think he's a bad player, but I always half wondered, is he? I thought he would definitely go to this World Cup, but I thought he was going to go because he's such a handy player to have in the squad, because you don't have to take Phil Jones because you've got you've got a defender and a defensive midfielder, so you've got another slot there to bring in the position we're weakest. The problem is then that, like I say, Oxlade-Chamberlain gets himself injured, and suddenly we are struggling for central midfielders, because as much as we would like to have seen it, there was no way Shelvey was getting anywhere near this side because his personality doesn't fit, and there's no way Wilshere was getting near this side having played zero football. So he sort of feels like a little bit of a victim of circumstance, but 24 years old, he's got 28, 29 caps. He's going to get at least double that and more, isn't he? So
I hope so.
No real worries there. Let's talk about his compadre Jordan Henderson, who some people say I'm critical when I make the point about how average he is at everything.
Keep calling him bang average.
Well, but that's the thing. He's not bang average. It's just so weird that he just doesn't have any weak spots in his game and doesn't have any high spots. He's just a really functional midfielder. I would say, tentatively, this World Cup has completely backed up my assertion, and I think he's been brilliant in some games and just what we needed but he's not a top-line world-class midfielder. But we knew that before, and we know that now, and he performed past his level in a couple of games, I would argue. So I think it's an A, Chris.
He's an A for me. I've fallen for him pretty hard this World Cup, I must say.
I know you have.
Yeah, I think it's just that you know you're going to get a B out of him most times, and he stepped up and delivered us an A couple of times as well. And I think he was the driving force behind the good performances. Not the best player in those good performances, but a very, very important driving force. And more than that, I think we really missed him when he wasn't there.
Yeah. And that's that. To go back to that average comment, it's not that I think he's bang average, but he is Mr. Average. He get what you get out of him from the one week to the next week. There is always a base level that he will never go below. What he can do is rise above that, and that's what he's done in this World Cup. And he's also been a leader, Chris.
Yeah.
And he knows his limitations as well. There were times in that Croatia game where there was nothing he could do but try and get a touch and then just lump it out of there because he was swamped, absolutely swamped. And that stupid video that's going around that has just sort of distilled his entire game down to like 5 or 6 moments where he's just lumped it forward is so reductive when you look at the context of the game itself and what he was trying to do. That, yeah, it was a pretty easy A for me as well. RLC, I've been really impressed with his cameos. I can't give him more than a B because the only thing that was missing was a bit more playing time for me. I just thought he was really, really bright, really, really good. But also, as I said to you in a text message, Chris, there are moments in his game where you realise he's just not played enough football at the age of 22 because he just makes. It's not even naivety. It's just that little bit of decision making that just disappears at the wrong moment. All he needs is games, and he is going to be a top class player, isn't he?
I think it's like a mental rawness, isn't there? It's almost not quite a fearlessness, but that little level of exuberance that just allows him to be such a bright, such a bold, exciting player, but make one or two choices that kind of betray the fact that he's not played that much football over his career, which, there's still plenty of it ahead of him. He just didn't play enough for any higher than a B for me, but when he was on, I thought we looked a little bit less predictable. Yeah, had a little bit more forward drive. And I would argue, given the, I would say, questionable fitness of someone we're going to talk about fairly shortly, that he should have had a few more minutes over the course of the competition for me.
I would completely agree. It was those moments where he sticks the afterburners on. He goes round a couple of defenders, but there's always a moment in those runs where he looks up and you realise he's not sure what he's going to do next either. But that will come. Whether it comes at Chelsea this year under Sarri, whether Sarri's had a look at him and thought, yeah, you're going to play consistently, whether he goes out on loan again, I feel pretty certain he's going to play a full season this year, and England will benefit from that longer term, no end. Jesse Lingard is another B for me because I thought he was excellent in the group, but then faded in the knockouts. You can't write off all the good work he did in the first 2 group games because he faded like several players did. But he got... I'm not going to use the words found out, but I thought Colombia and Croatia... Sweden was a different kettle of fish. It was a strange game. But Colombia and Croatia just had a little tactical plan for him, didn't they?
I think the situation and the plans of the opposition were a big part of it. I felt what we missed against Croatia and against Belgium, and this is going to sound a lot crueler than it's intended to sound. We missed Lingard. and he was on the pitch.
Yeah,
which is it should. I don't mean it to be that damning. What I mean is he was a crucial component in the group, and he was our live wire in those first couple of games, and he just wasn't able to get that same foothold when we got into the knockouts. So faded is the right word, but his early importance shouldn't be overlooked.
One of the best coaches I ever worked under said that on your attacking intentions in a football team, you need several players who know what they're doing and sticking to a plan, and you need a question mark. And your question mark is, if we don't know what we're going to get from him, how on earth will they know what they're going to get from him? And the thing is that the Tunisia game in particular, I thought the pockets of space he was picking up was brilliant. And Panama, while they were a pub team, they just couldn't live with him at all. I mean, right from the first minute, they just caused complete panic. He's just got to learn from the experience, hasn't he, Chris? He's just got to learn and move on. Yeah. And hopefully that B is going to be an A next time in the Euros, would be my honest take on it, Chris.
I'll be expected an A from him. He's got now a lot of big game experience, and he's doing fine in those big games. You know, he's scored an FA Cup final, scored a massive goal for England. He absolutely belongs in this company, and he just needs to start kind of really imposing himself in the midfield, which I think is where at the very highest international level, you find yourself coming up against players who are absolute worldies in central midfield, and a player who arguably would be, equally as effective full on outside striker.
Yeah.
So he doesn't necessarily have the grounding in actual central midfield work.
No.
When it comes to playing up against a very, very good defensive midfielder,
yeah,
you're going to find it difficult. But he belongs in that company. He is good enough to do it.
Before we move on to Dele Alli, the last thing I would say about Lingard is that he needs to learn to score from 6 to 8 yards. I mean, give him some absolutely 1 out of 10 opportunity from 25 yards out, and he bangs it in. He does the same for Man United, but what he struggles with slightly more are the sort of bread and butter goals. But Dele Alli, it's a C, and he was a lot better, I thought, against Sweden. But like Danny Rose, he just wasn't fit, was he, Chris?
No, after that first game, it was clear. I thought he played for too long in that game.
Yeah, and it was literally first half of that game as well, it should be said. Yeah. I mean, we thought he was going before half-time. He managed to get through till half-time, and then he managed to come out second half. And he just, I don't know why we persisted, Chris.
I don't. He has a tactical importance to the team, and he's very dangerous, but he just seems like the kind of player where anything other than 100%, you start to look very much short of where you need to be.
Yeah.
And the key was in his ability to link up with Harry Kane, and I don't really think we saw the best of that. And again, I'm not entirely convinced that it's Ali's fault in particular.
No.
But what it did do was make, funnily enough, in this situation, is usually the striker. I thought it made Ali look really isolated at times.
Yeah. Moving on to the sort of attack, the forward line. Danny Welbeck's obviously I think with the options we've got coming through, this might be Danny Welbeck's last time at a tournament, a bit like Phil Jones.
Yep.
Jamie Vardy, I think we can go over pretty quickly. It's a C, but he never had a game opportunity that was right for him or set for him. He picked up the groin strain that stopped him taking a penalty. There was very little Jamie Vardy could do about Jamie Vardy's performance, really, was there, Chris?
Yeah, saw nothing from him to changed my view of him either way, really.
Yeah.
It was what it was.
Jamie Vardy is an excellent plan B, but if you're going to use him as a plan B, it needs to be a plan B. You can't just play the same way and just change Kane for Vardy, because Vardy can't do the same thing. Marcus Rashford, slightly funny tournament. There were a couple of times where I thought he looked brilliant, and a couple of times where he looked completely out of his depth in the time he spent on the pitch. Again, we didn't have ages to judge it from, but obviously we had the Belgium game where he missed that big chance, but I think it was a missable chance. It wasn't like it was an open goal.
Yeah.
But again, you may disagree, Chris, but I think it's a C just because we just didn't see enough to just take him on a level.
I don't disagree at all. I think it was a difficult tournament for him because, much like Vardy, I don't think the game situations that he was thrown into did him any favours.
No.
And in that Belgium game, he got himself a couple of chances. And I think that says a lot about the right situations for him and how they didn't kind of materialise elsewhere.
The one thing I did think, Chris, and I'll be honest with you here, is I was watching him, and he was one of the players in that squad that genuinely felt like the future. He felt like, you've been to a tournament now, it doesn't really matter how you've ended up playing because you have 2 tournaments experience now, so you know what it's like to go away for the summer, you know what it's like to do extremely badly, you now know what it's like to do extremely well. There's a footballer who is going to get a hell of a lot of caps for England, isn't there?
He will, and rightly so, because it's clear. You say he looks brilliant, and that's because that's what he is. He is a fantastic footballer and fantastic talent. Arguably, just not quite ready for the situations that he was thrown into. He was in there to, in the games that we can consider competitive ones, he was there to rescue us.
Yeah,
and that's a big ask.
So I think it's a C, Chris.
Yep.
Yeah. Credit to him that he hasn't been completely Mourinho'd yet either. Leaves us just 2 to talk about, really. Sterling and Kane, both. We'll have to keep one eye on the time because we like to keep these sort of shorter than we do other podcasts. But Raheem Sterling got a ridiculous amount of coverage before the tournament, was under the telescope during the tournament, and his finishing was poor. I think we can both say that.
Yep.
But there were other aspects to his game that were utterly brilliant. The space he created and the panic he caused defenders. I mean, I was so disappointed to see him go off in the semi-final, because every time he got the ball, you could see the panic. You could see, and I would love to have seen Sterling down one side and Rashford down the other. I really would, but it's just the finishing. If he'd have scored even a single goal, we wouldn't have to have the debate with people who just want to see the bad things, would we, Chris?
The goal would have had a big effect because the lack of finishing is the go-to criticism for people who, and I'm not throwing you into this if you don't belong in this, by the way, but if you aren't really that into football and you've decided that Sterling isn't any good based on the fact that he didn't score, the goal fixes that for you in the blink of an eye. The goal fixes Sterling in the blink of an eye. I think he comes out from a goal in this tournament and plays much better, has that level of excitement that we didn't quite get from him. And it was just very odd watching what for me was a very good tournament from Raheem Sterling, but was a largely functional tournament from Raheem Sterling, which I've not seen that from him specifically before. I've probably not watched him that closely as I do when he's playing a major tournament for England.
Yeah.
But the job he did for the team throughout was fantastic. Definitely the finishing needs to improve in order to really bump him up to the top level of the team as we're grading them. And I think unfortunately he was one of the players who ran out of steam towards the business end of the competition a little bit, and also suffered from, I think, somebody else near him carrying an injury for a while.
Yeah, but it's still it's one of the most comfortable Bs you'll ever give, isn't it?
Yeah, Yeah, I think so. He's certainly not a C.
No.
And I think
if he gets the
Croatia, in fact, half-time Croatia, he's edging a B+.
If he gets the goal, if he gets a single goal, even if it's against Panama, disrespect. Well, I was about to say no disrespect to Panama. Actually, I'm just remembering the way they played. All disrespect to Panama. It changes it. But speaking of goals, I said on this podcast that I thought Harry Kane was carrying an injury. I've seen nothing to change my mind. He still did an excellent job in the capacity he could. But I'd be amazed if he's not missing some games at the start of the season with some sort of muscle injury. If he's not and he plays, I would be staggered if he sets off at anything other than an extremely sluggish pace until he picks up an injury, has a few weeks off and comes back and is all right. I mean, he's brilliant, isn't he? He's a world-class striker, but something went ping in that Colombia game, didn't it?
Absolutely. I largely think he's the best in the world in that position at the moment. The Golden Boot, I'm going to say just to annoy some people, definitely backs that up. He was a crucial cog in the wheel for England early on in this competition. He was the thing that all of the set-piece play was built around. I think the two set pieces against Tunisia were so different to the ones that came after it, and we've as a supporter base, we've slightly forgotten about those ones, and those two goals have been written off as yet more set piece goals.
We both said what a brilliant goal that second goal was.
Yeah.
The instinctive reaction to finish like that was just incredible. But
the first as well, yes, it was a set piece and yes, it was a tap-in, but it was built around putting Harry Kane in the right place.
Yeah, and it's instinct. There are probably well over 50% of the strikers in world football who wouldn't have been in that position because their instinct just doesn't take them there naturally. But
so he deserves much more credit for those two goals, I think, than he's getting. I think the first penalty that he scored is the best goal of the competition. And the one that came off his heel, whatever. But there was pressure on some of these spot kicks, you know? And he just never, ever felt like he was going to miss. Scored in the shootout against Colombia as well. And for a guy who I agree was definitely not totally fit, he had, I think, a very good tournament, and he scored the goals, regardless of how many people would prefer that he hadn't and want to take him away from him. And it was evident that England's standard dropped when Kane dropped into midfield.
I've watched the Croatia game twice because I actively hate fun. And the first time I did it was in the pub and I was keeping an eye on him. The second time I was at home and I was sober, which is key. And I can tell you now, go back and watch the game. Anyone who's listening to this, he can't run, Chris. He can't run. I was looking for it, and he just had no burst of acceleration. And every time he did or he tried, he literally pulls up. Now, he doesn't sort of grab his knee or his ankle or his hammy or anything like that, but he lost something physically. Now, what was remarkable was that he still gave something to the team. He still offered us something. He was still a worthwhile being in that first 11 in a way that I'd suggest there were times when Ali perhaps wasn't. And I don't think the two of them obviously struggling helped either of them, as you said, because Ali likes to get close to Kane. That's the way they play. But that Colombia game, he finished the game essentially playing as a central midfielder. The Croatia game, as the game goes on, he cannot run, but he's still worrying defenders. He's still a threat from set pieces. He's still pulling defenders out and giving space to others. He's a proper footballer, isn't he, Chris?
I think he's the best we've got. Yeah. And I think there are others who were able to perform better in this competition. But as the great white hope of English football, to have someone who's already got a World Cup Golden Boot, who's already scored a hat-trick at a World Cup, who's already won a penalty shootout, and still has so many years ahead of him. It's a real bonus for us.
I always define world class as, could you drop this player into sort of 99% of teams worldwide and he instantly makes them better. He doesn't really make Juventus better because they've now got Cristiano Ronaldo playing through the middle, so they're just getting each other's way. He probably doesn't make Barcelona better because he'd just annoy Messi by getting into the same sort of areas. I can't think of another team in world football that he doesn't improve by being there. I'd swap him for Lewandowski at Bayern Munich in a heartbeat. And they play a sort of slightly similar way. They are sort of true strikers, if you like. He's world class, and I'm like you. You can't, if you want to judge somebody and say that it's the most undeserved golden boot of all time, you don't understand how a golden boot works, because you earn a golden boot by scoring goals. It's
they just
not
count
subjective.
The goals.
Yeah, it's not a panel. And scoring penalties in high-pressure situations is a skill. Not every footballer in the world can do it, let alone every striker.
Well, look at the ones who've missed in this competition.
Exactly, Chris. So it's absolutely an A for me, and it would have been an A-star if something hadn't gone ping against Colombia. But he still, what I as I said, what I come back to is, he never. There were times. Let's be honest. There were times when Ali was essentially absent. He just wasn't contributing anything, Chris. Whereas Harry Kane, I felt, managed to contribute nearly all the time. And yeah, I thought it was a remarkable World Cup from him, really. And two fingers up at all of those people who laughed at him about the Golden Boot in that interview beforehand, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It was a bold statement. And I'm glad he was able to fulfill it.
Yeah. And no, it's a bit like Lineker. Nobody can take that away from you now.
Yeah.
You know, a golden boot at a World Cup. Yes, please. Thank you very much. I'd take that as a career achievement. Right, so England squad ranked. We hope you enjoyed the World Cup. We hope you've enjoyed our semi-regular schedule. Things will calm down a little bit now going forward, but we have a My Favourite England match coming up with Johnny Gabriel at some point. We've got internationals in 7 weeks now? Is it 7? I think it's 7 weeks.
Nations League.
About. Yes, yeah. We'll have lots of news to talk about in the meantime. And we're going to go back to doing what we were doing before, which is revisiting previous tournaments or asking some questions about England's future, England's past, and everything in between. So we hope you'll stay with us. We hope you've enjoyed the World Cup. You can find us on Twitter, Chris, at
England Podcasts.
And on Sphinx FTBL.
Yeah, exactly that. And our personal accounts as well, of course. But England Podcast is where you'll find everything all of the time.
Yes, he's at Chris M. Nee. I'm at David Hartrick. And this is us signing off for the World Cup. See you later.
Cheerio.